series of German attacks on the Western Front in the spring of 1918. Germany had a manpower advantage over the Allies since Russia had left the war following the Revolution. But German High Command realized that this would disappear as millions of troops began arriving from the USA. If Germany were to win the war, they needed to strike immediately and strike hard. German stormtroops would lead the attack. This was the first use of German tanks and an artillery bombardment so massive it could be heard in London. The Germans broke through the Allied lines, advancing further than anyone had in the West since 1914. But as the weeks went on, they were unable to move supplies and reinforcements forward quickly enough to continue the advance. Though they had made great No other war in history had brought such change so quickly as World War I. It's been said that between 1914 and 1918, the world went from 1870 to 1940. And in many ways, it is true. Men rode into war on horses and rode out of it in tanks. In August 1914, old school met new as infantry marched out en masse in brightly coloured uniforms against machine guns. The new school won. Airships and airplanes sailed the skies, submarines and battleships prowled the seas, and the biggest gun of all, the Paris gun, fired shells that were the first man-made objects to reach the stratosphere. Stormtroops, the creeping barrage, chemical warfare, the psychological warfare of bombing civilians far from the front. These were the hallmarks of the First World War. Even things we take for granted today, like the zipper, radio communications, sanitary napkins and soya sausages became everyday conveniences because of the war. And medicine made greater progress in those 4 years than at any other time or after. As the victors redrew the map after the war, many countries we know today emerged. The post-World War was, in every respect, a new world. The two sides in the war were two alliances of empires. The central powers were the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. The Entente powers, today often referred to as the Allies, were composed of many more nations and featured the British and Russian empires, two of the three largest empires in world history, who ruled more than a third of the world between them. Before the war, though, the alliances had been somewhat different. The Triple Alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy was counterbalanced by the Franco-Russian alliance, and most people believed that these alliances would prevent war. They were wrong. Monte Grappa occupied a strategic position on the Assaggio Plateau, overlooking the gateway of the plains of Veneto. Whoever controlled its heights controlled the area, and it saw its share of battles during the war. In 1917, the Italians halted the Austrian summer offensive at the very peak, and by December the Austrians had been pushed off the mountain. Further attempts to take the mountain in the spring and summer of 1918 also failed, and Monte Grappa, by then the symbol for Italy's defence, would play a huge part in the final Italian offensive of the war on Vittorio Veneto. Brutal fighting finally forced the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian army and its retreat in late October 1918. Two-thirds of the casualties of the offensive were inflicted around Monte Grappa itself. Europe, before the Great War, is often described as tranquil and peaceful. But in the decades before the Great War broke out, there had been Balkan Wars, the Russo-Japanese War, terrorism, assassinations, and increasing demands for civil rights and self-governance throughout the empires. And so, when Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot, at first it barely caused a ripple. In Britain and France, it was seen as just another political assassination in a far-off corner of Europe where things like that happened. It was certainly not a reason to go to war. But all the nations who went to war did have other reasons, and as it turned out, that assassination was the perfect foil to make the dominoes fall. Austria-Hungary wanted an empire to the Mediterranean. Russia wanted influence in the Balkans. Germany feared Russian economic expansion and also wanted a larger global empire. France wanted back the lands it had lost to Prussia. Britain wanted to curb German expansion, especially naval and colonial expansion, while preserving its own worldwide empire. Some leaders also saw war as a way to silence the protests and boost nationalism. But it wasn't just political. War was big business. Someone would have to supply the troops, to produce the weapons, ammunition, and uniforms. Those someones would make fortunes. It's no secret that the war created tens of thousands of millionaires, and it's no secret either that many business leaders urged their governments to war in 1914. Before the war, but when it broke out in 1914, they claimed that the alliance, if won, and Italy had no obligation to join an offensive war. However, 1 year later, Italy joined the war siding with the Allies, hoping to reclaim lost Italian lands that were now part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Italian front was characterized by mountains. The amount of soldiers wounded compared to killed was far greater there than other fronts, because stray bullets would splinter the rock into deadly projectiles that were particularly dangerous to eyes and faces. Many celebrated names of the 20th century served in the Great War in their youth. Authors such as J.R.R. Tolkien and Ernest Hemingway, and the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, to name but a few. For many others, it was the war that made them famous. Mata Hari, the Red Baron, Edith Cavell, Lawrence of Arabia, and infamous Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, George Patton. There were also those who opposed the war, whose influence on our world would be enormous. Albert Einstein and Vladimir Lenin. It was, to put it simply, an age of heroes and legends in the face of an apocalypse.
Medical pass for you!
Halfway there, the enemy has the upper hand.
Take that first aid! Right there! First aid!
Thanks for that.
Here's some first aid, pal! There! First aid for you!
We are losing objective
There!
Charlie.
First aid! First aid, take it! There's some first aid! That's first aid for you!
We have lost objective butter.
Take the medical pouch!
We have an armored train en route.
First aid, get patched up! Here, first aid.
Thank you.
Take a medical pouch.
I owe you one, bud.
First aid, use it. Take the medical pouch.
Our armored train has arrived.
There's some first aid! First aid, get patched up! Need some first aid, pal! Here, first aid!
Thank you.
First aid, take it!